another episode of Agency Edition. This is a toggle series for agency leaders who want to grow their business. Now today I'm talking to Kyle Hunt. He's the CEO of Agency Operators Level Up, a consultancy which helps agency owners with 50 to 250k in monthly revenue improve operations to help them scale. I'm super excited about today's episode because Kyle doesn't follow the usual playbook of agency tips and insights. In this episode, he shares some honest truths for agency owners about why they must look beyond basic metrics and really think about what clients want and need and how much value they're actually giving clients. He explains why the most profitable agencies stick to one thing and do it really well without spreading themselves too thin. He also explains how using a pod model can increase team capacity by up to 30% without adding any headcount, and that most agencies are actually tracking the wrong metrics if they're tracking them at all. Some of my favorite takeaways from this chat with Kyle was how he challenged traditional agency mindsets and rules. And I think agency owners will get a ton of value from Kyle's advice around metric tracking, SOP creation, and just team structure. So here's my interview with Kyle Hunt. All right. Kyle, why don't you kick us off with who you are, a bit about your background, and run us through what Agency Operator does.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me on this. Super excited to be here and talk about the exciting world of ops, who like 5 people are just excited about talking about ops right now. But so my name is Kyle Hunt, and I'm the founder of Agency Operators Level Up, which is a community and a mastermind of agency owners that are looking to grow their agencies. And I focus 100% on operations. So I don't talk about lead gen. I don't talk about sales. All I talk about is ops all day long. It's the most fun business that I've ever had by far. And I've been in the agency space, or at least the online marketing space, for going on like 13 years, I think, now maybe 14. Owned a bunch of different businesses, from lead generation businesses to e-commerce businesses. I scaled one called Family Gifts Co. to multiple 8 figures back in the COVID days. Became a partner at Weekend Digital and Weekend Investments, where we acquired and invested in D2C assets. So I think there's 10 brands that we currently have an investment interest in. And now I'm the founder of Agency Operators, and we're here today.
What made you want to niche down just to do ops? Because, normally when, I don't know if you'd pitch yourself as a consultancy, I'm assuming that's how you describe yourself, but normally it's kind of like a full front, they'll come in and help you with like lead gen, ops, all that, but you're just doing ops. So what made you niche down into just ops?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that's a function of strategy. And this is actually very similar to like advice that I give to agency owners that I'm working with, which is find something that you do really well and focus on that one thing and try to scale it. As opposed to a lot of agency owners that I work with, they're really good at one service and they're like, why don't we add this other thing that we might not be as good at, but might be able to drive more revenue? So for me, it's like, if I just focus on ops and doing really great at ops and helping agencies scale through ops, then I become known as the ops person. And it's a lot easier to serve a smaller group of people like that than it is to serve a bunch of people and try to be everything to them. That's the first part. And the second part is I just really enjoy it. Like, I'm not an excellent salesperson because I haven't had 10,000 reps in sales. I wouldn't consider myself a domain expert in lead gen, like some of the people that we bring in. We had Nick Abram talking about lead gen. We had Tim Keene talking about lead gen. All these really amazing people that are great at that thing. Like, I'm not that, so I focus on what I know.
I think it's interesting because I think you could probably use that same analogy as an agency owner, like someone actually in the weeds of it. And I think a constant theme that's come up when I've been talking to people is people either scale vertically, have something that they're really good at and then offer services vertically, or they do the horizontal and just have to go like offer everything under the sun. So it sounds like you've taken the vertical approach, which seems to be a little bit more popular in terms of profitability. And
yeah, there's a few reasons why too. Like, single service agencies or people that focus on one thing tend to be more profitable as well, and they tend to have fewer employees and a higher revenue per employee, because like operationally, it's just so much of an easier business to run. And I say this being the ex-COO of a full service agency that sold 7 services. And like, that business model, I think the only reason I would ever do that again is strategically. I worked with another agency that specifically wanted to acquire other assets through that agency. So that was like the strategic reason we had all those services, because our hypothesis was that to acquire other D2C assets like e-commerce brands, we had to be good at all these things in order to sell them on it and then to scale them as well. if that's not your plan, like if you're not trying to build a portfolio, like one or two services that you're really awesome at, that business is so much more easier. And then also typically valued higher from an evaluation perspective too.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think most agency owners expand with that mindset or not?
No.
No.
Like what usually happens is you're good at one service and then a client asks for another service. And because you're revenue hungry, you say yes. And I think there might be certain business models where that can work. I don't think that agencies is one of them, specifically like the type of agencies that I work with, which are e-commerce or D2C agencies, because the operational excellence required to be great at any service that you sell. So like email marketing, creative marketing, paid media is like unfathomable the amount of things you need to be good at. So you're like, oh, we sell email. Now we're going to sell paid media. It's like, man, that's so different from each other. Like what you have to learn to sell this and then integrate the two so it's cohesive for the end user, the client is like insane. So it seems to be the easiest way to scale, but when you actually try to do it, it's the most difficult way to generate additional revenue.
Yeah, it's definitely a theme that I've noticed that maybe I spend too much time on Reddit, especially when I've been researching for this series, and it seems to be a theme. People will get asked to add, if they do a service, and they immediately think about offering it because the client wants it. So I guess people are adding things in different ways, but yeah, I think you'd be a minority in thinking about acquisition when talking about expanding. But I just want to ask about your business now, Agency Operators. About a year old, right?
So we started November 25th of last year. So we're almost in month 5. Yeah, it's been fun.
And I know, so very early days then, 5-6 months. So have you noticed any themes of people coming to you yet? Any, problems that a lot of agency owners are coming up against, whether it's operationally or trying to scale, or they're just stagnant, or what have you learned over the last 5-6 months?
It's very interesting. So we have some smaller agencies and agency operator, and like agency operators level up is the community mastermind. It's a lot of group coaching. And the average size of agency there is about $100,000 in revenue per month. And then I also do one-on-one consulting with some larger agencies that are, $4, $5, $6 million in revenue a year. And they all actually have the same problems. They all have structural challenges of like how to sort people out and to best position people. They all have process issues of like how do we develop and continue to create processes that people actually follow, because most people won't. How do we track the right metrics that lead to the result that we want? And the problems are very similar. You just add a zero to the revenue line. That's the only difference between them. So the problems are all very similar.
So I think we'll leave the metric bucket for a little bit because I think we'll be talking about that for a while. But let's start with the people one. Is it a people management problem? Are they having trouble keeping up with the services they're offering? Is it a forecasting issue? All of the above? Yeah. What are people normally struggling with?
So I think what the problem usually appears as is people see that their teams are being overwhelmed, and they're like, how do I create a structure to get additional capacity out of the team? And most agency owners have read books like EOS or read books like Traction by Gino Wickman, which I think is really good training wheels for small professional service businesses. And they've read things like maybe Scaling Up by Vern Harnish. And those tend to be more functional type of businesses that those create, where you have functions. So you might have like a copy function and a design function. And I think that whole model doesn't really work very well with agencies. I think that a much better model than like a typical functional business for agencies is a service line or pod model. And that's where you have groups of highly skilled people that are working together on the same group of clients, because this creates a lot of accountability for those people, for those clients. It's a lot easier to track KPIs because they're attributed to only those specific groups of clients. And then it's also easier to compensate those people because you know the output that they're creating because they're only focusing on those specific clients. So I think the structural issue is like, how do we best structure the agency to take on more clients? And usually my answer is, let's try to get people in these cohesive pods, which usually you can add 20 to 30% capacity just by getting people together and focusing on the same group of clients, versus everybody works on every client that comes in, and you're never really, as a frontline team member, able to focus on any one client or really go deep on them or learn on them. So that's usually what I mean by like structural when people come to talk to me about that.
Right. So I'm just thinking in like an example sense. So instead of having someone that does ads, and then someone that does copy, and then someone that does design, working across every single account. You have like multi-skilled individuals that have like a bucket of accounts. Is that what you mean?
So that could actually be one way to solve that problem. What I specifically mean is usually agencies that are smaller will have what's called a shared service model, where you might have paid media. Let's use email. Email is a good example. You might have like a few people who do copy and they work on all the clients. And then you might have a few people that do design and they work on all the clients. So what I'm saying is like you should have one designer and then one copy person together who work on the same group of clients, right? As
Gotcha.
opposed to building these functional barriers where like you have the copy team and you have the design team. And that's really common as like an outsourced design or a shared service design. There's a lot of reasons why that's not really the best way to go about things, but agency owners just look at the individual costs of the employees versus the system costs to make this decision. But that's what I'm talking about is like, how do we create these smaller cohesive groups of people that are only working, that are aligned together on the same group of people?
And is that normally just a mindset thing, or is that a structural kind of like what tools they're using to just organize the business? All of the above again? They're just trying to scale too quickly and take everything on. I guess a lot of these agencies are just trying to set a good foundation, right? Which is why they've come to you. So I'm just wondering, what do you normally recommend for them? Do you just tell them to like chill and like let's fix it from the tools you're using or the people, or what's the advice you're giving to them first?
Okay. So this is a really interesting question. So changing anything is very difficult. People are very resistant to change. Naturally, it's like we've had hundreds of millions of years of things and we try to resist the new stuff. So part of change management is making sure something really, really good happens as soon as you're starting to work with somebody so that they trust you and you build that relationship, and then doing the thing that they actually need to do. So like one of the things that I recommend for people who come to agency operators is like, let's do something really impactful first. Like, let's go over your calendar and let's remove stuff that doesn't make sense on there or stuff that you could give to other people and really do this exercise that's really high impact first. And that's the first thing we should do. And then after that, what we should do is the thing that nobody wants to do, but everybody needs to do, which is let's take a look at the foundations of your agency. And that's where we go over things like what's the mission of your agency? What's your vision? What are your core values? And those three things specifically have a really bad reputation because people think they're for larger agencies, or they just think it's boring and then they don't want to do it. But I'm like, if you don't understand what you're trying to do long term, how can you possibly figure out what you're trying to do short term, what your priorities should be short term? So we figure out those three things. And then the next thing that we figure out is their ICP, their ideal client profile. And the common mistake here for agency owners is they'll look at their book of business and they'll be like, okay, I have 100 clients and then 80 of them are this type of client. Therefore, that is the type of client that I should go after. But you're not trying to find the most common type of agency you work with. You're trying to find the ideal agency that you work with. So what I recommend is like you literally pull out QuickBooks or whatever software you use and you look at the last however many years of data you have of clients and sort by revenue and be like, okay, who's actually paid us the most amount of money? And then another column is profitability. Like, because sometimes the clients you have that pay you a lot of money are not very profitable because you're spending a lot of time on them. So we have revenue, profit, and then the last is ease to work with. Like, do you actually enjoy working with them or not? And the goal is to find these small pockets of brands you work with or clients you work with. And it might only be like 4 or 5 clients out of a 100 client list. We're like, wow, those clients make a lot of money from them, super profitable, and it's like really easy to work with them. We get along with them really well, and the relationship is easy. Like, okay, how do we pivot the entire business to only focus on those brands? From a marketing perspective, how do we change our marketing to only attract those type of people? And then from an operations perspective, how do we streamline the entire business around those types of companies? And then we get into strategy, which is like what we're trying to accomplish. And then we build priorities based off of that strategy, which is like how we're actually going to do those things. So like, I know what I just said took a really long time, and that's because most people find it really boring and it's not exciting. But that is literally one of the most important things that agency owners need to do is try to understand what you're trying to do and then who you're trying to do it with.
I don't think it's boring. I think it's very interesting, but it's bread and butter stuff, right? And what you just said about not just looking at a top line number and going after that type of customer is interesting because one of the people that I interviewed for this series a couple of weeks ago, he said the same thing. Like when they really started digging into their books, they would see these clients that, you know, might have looked really good on paper. But then once you started digging into the numbers and figuring out how much time you're spending on the account, they were actually a massive time suck. And it was like, Well, it's actually not that profitable because they may be bringing in, an extra couple of grand a month, but the time that they're expecting us to spend on the accounts actually double. So it just echoes what you were just saying about not just taking the numbers at face value. But just on the back of that, I did read your a couple of your newsletters in prep for this interview, and there was
Thank you.
one yeah, I thought they were good. They were
Thanks.
really good.
I put a lot
There
into
was
them.
one that you were talking about SOPs that I thought was cool because you framed it in a way that I did pick out one of your quotes. The best processes are team led, not manager directed. And I thought the way that you're talking about designing SOPs with the team was really interesting because I hadn't really heard anyone frame them like that before. And I think you'd be able to explain it better than me, but you're explaining that when you create the SOPs, get your team involved so they're all on the same page from day one. A, I'm assuming you recommend that to people in agency operators, but B, what does that actually look like in practice? Because it sounds good, but I'm just wondering what it actually looks like when you do it.
Yeah, so really good question. This is how SOP curation happens in most agencies, especially smaller agencies, even larger agencies. The founder or a manager will sit down and they'll be like, something went wrong, we need to create processes. And then they will lock themselves in a room for a week and they'll create this perfect SOP document that looks beautiful and has everything detailed and perfect. And then they'll give it to the team and the team will be like, this is not how this works. Like, you're still far out of the business. This is stupid. We're not going to do this. And then it fails. Like that's actually what happens 99% of the time. That doesn't create buy-in for the people who are on the team. It doesn't create excitement. It doesn't help them learn, which is one of the goals of process creation too. It's helping the team learn so they can make better processes for you. So what I recommend instead of having manager created SOPs is team created SOPs. And I call them playbooks. The terms are interchangeable. I think SOP just has like a dirty name, so I don't call it an SOP. And the way that I personally build playbooks is number one, I find something that's on fire. So we need a reason for change. What's on fire? Because most people will just start with something like the beginning of a process. And then people are just creating process to create process, but people don't feel the impetus. They don't feel like the need to create process. So find something that's on fire that you can have a reason to fix. And number two, teach the team what good process looks like. So there's like a course that I have in agency operators on how to create good process. It's like an hour long. You can watch it in 30 minutes at 2x speed if you're inside the group. And we show this to the team, like this is what good process looks like. So they know this is what we're trying to create. And then I sit down with the team in a group environment, like on Zoom like this, and we walk through the thing that's on fire. And I'm like, okay, tell me what the current process is for this. And then we write it down so we can visualize it so that everybody can learn what it is, everybody who's on the Zoom. And I tend to do that for 15 to 30 minutes per day after a daily huddle, which a lot of agency owners are resistant to those too, but I highly recommend them. So every day we're creating new process and we're understanding better of what's happening and we're able to fix things very quickly. So if you do that for like 30, 60, 90 days, you will create process very rapidly and the team will learn how to create good process because you're coaching and guiding on them. So instead of here's the process, I'm like, team, how do we do this? Okay, this doesn't make sense. What's a better way that we could think about doing this? So I coach them on what else, how can we make this better? And I might provide some suggestions, but it's more like coaching so that they learn how to create good process and they learn to understand the process versus me telling them what to do. And the additional benefits to that are that the team is now involved in process creation and you have removed yourself as the bottleneck as the process creator. So they're going to come up with ideas on their own that are better than yours. I guarantee it. And they're going to continue to do that because they were involved in the initial creation of the process. So I think for those reasons, I really prefer having this team created approach versus the manager created approach.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I think when you explain it like that, obviously the top-down approach probably isn't ideal, right? Because your team are the ones that are actually doing the day-to-day work. They know the processes or maybe how long a certain account will take or a task will take. So obviously it makes sense to involve them probably even more so in an agency than like a standard in-house team, right? Because it is so time dependent on tasks. But exactly. On the back of that, what would this is going to be more of like a broad question, but what would your dream like day-to-day like agency operation look like in terms of like a project's coming in and how you set it up and distribute it to like team members? What does your dream process look like if you had an agency right now? Okay. What would it look like on the back end?
This is such an interesting question because people have definitions of like project management and what that looks like. So I think that the best agencies are ran and they already know exactly what they're supposed to be doing on a daily basis and on a weekly basis. So your team should be able to come into work and they should already know exactly what they're going to be working on today and for the rest of the week. And it's already pre-planned and it's already pre-structured so that there's less chaos in the agency. And then the work is not variable. So we do something that's called leveling the work, which means if I'm an agency owner and I use email because it's really easy to conceptualize. It's a very linear process that has a beginning and an end. And I'm like, if I'm an email agency owner and I have 100 emails that I'm delivering this month for clients, I know that I have 25 emails that are due every single week because there's 4 weeks on average in most months. And then I know there's 5 emails per day that are due every single day because 25 divided by 5 days per week. So the process is level. We don't have this variability that most agency owners have, where they're like, we have 15 things to do today, and then 2 tomorrow, and 7 the next day. No, we remove all that because it's self-inflicted chaos. And in advance, we already know exactly what we should be doing. So like for an email agency or creative agency, you have the entire month pre-planned in advance for what you're supposed to be doing Monday when you come into work, Tuesday when you come in for work, Wednesday for you when you come in for work. So as much structure and pre-planning as possible. And it's like there's a saying, an ounce of pre is worth a pound in post. And it's that same kind of mindset where like we just do a little bit of, and it sounds like a lot of planning. It is not that much. A little bit of planning to stabilize things and to have a very level workload for the team. And it will make their life so much easier and they will be so much happier at work.
How are you getting to a point where you know how much all that work, like where you're comfortable plotting it out that far in advance? Are you going by gut? Is it because you've involved your team and they know how long they know that they can handle doing 5 emails a day, but they can't handle doing 10? I guess it comes down to utilization rates, but how do you get to a point where you're comfortable managing all your work like that and knowing that it's not going to go off the rails?
I love this. I love this actually. I think utilization is a very poor metric. And the reason why I think utilization is a very poor metric is because utilization only tells you the amount of hours worked. It doesn't tell you anything about the value delivered. And you can have somebody who is at 50% utilization that is a high performer relative to somebody who's at 80% utilization and is a low performer. So I don't like utilization as a metric per se. What I prefer is capacity. And capacity I define as how many clients can this person take on with excellence and still perform at a high quality. So the way you do that is you actually take a deep look at process and time, how long it takes people to do things on average. So for instance, if you own an email agency and you have designers, the typical email agency designer will design 1 email per hour. It typically takes them about 60 minutes to create 1 email. There are about 6 working hours per day on average for most people before your creativity drops and you start to make errors and you can't think. Like you can really only focus about 6 hours, maybe 6.5 hours a day. After that, productivity drops, the rates increase. You'll have more revisions from clients, like things just drop off. That person can have, if it's 1 email per hour, they can create 6 emails per hour. So we create their capacity based on their actual ability to do work with excellence. Now, what I like to do then is question, why does it take them an hour to create a design? What if they could create 2 designs per hour? We just now doubled our capacity. So, and like, it's easy to say that. It's actually difficult to go into people's work and do that.
Mm-hmm.
But we actually did that exact thing at weekends, and we were able to double our email capacity because we found that our designers were creating everything 100% custom. So there was no templating at all. It was all 100% custom. And when they did things, they would batch them. So it would take a long time, and then they batch things 30 days out. So clients would have multiple revisions before they approve them. And there's all these things that were stopping them from, like, why can't we do it double versus single? So I prefer looking at capacity, and we do that by actually looking at the time it takes people to do the work with excellence versus the feeling people have where you're like, oh, we can handle 10 clients, because when we tried to do that in the past, the wheels fell off, and like we just can't do that, which is a self-limiting belief.
I'm laughing because you brought up batching, and I've seen you hating on batching in one of your emails. You're using like pizza analogies to describe why batch work is bad.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to expand on what you mean by batching? Because I have a feeling that a lot of agencies may be doing this and they don't know that it's problematic.
Yeah. So batching is when you're grouping like things together and working on them for a period of time. So batching, again, email is just really easy to think about linearly. Like if you batch strategy and you create strategy for 1 or 2 clients in a day, and then you pass that on to the next person who's probably like a copy or a designer, and they batch copy and they batch their design. You pass on to another person who's uh, um, like a designer, like they're going to batch that. And what happens is every time that you're batching things, you're actually delaying the creation of the next part in line. So the average email agency takes like 2 to 3 weeks to create one email, even though there's maybe 1 to 2 hours of actual work to create a single email. And it's because they tend to batch these things together. And then also they tend to have these functional built agencies. So they'll have the strategists, and you have this group of strategists, and they have their own little strategy land. And you have the designers, and designers have their own little silo. So the strategist will batch all these things together, and then they'll send it to the designers. And there's maybe like a 3 or 5 day expected turnaround time. And all of this time increases the chance of errors, increases the chance of revisions, which means that clients are less happy. I mean, your capacity is also going to be lower. So the way I approach it is like, how do we get this thing? And the way I imagine it is like you're passing a piece of paper from one person to the other. How do we get this thing into a state of flow? We're only working on one thing at a time for each person in this process, which is much more efficient. It gets done in a very shorter amount of time. You have less barriers and less silos, and clients are ultimately happier because there's fewer errors and fewer revisions in the process.
What does that look like on the back end? Like, I'm trying to think of that at scale. Are you encouraging people to waterfall projects, or if they are batching, to get them out of it and do things in a more efficient way?
Yeah. So number one, like leveling the workload is important for that. So like if you know you have 5 emails due today, there's only 5 emails due today. There's not 10. And then it comes down to, okay, what are the emails that we're going to create for this from start to finish? Like we are creating from start to finish today, 5 emails, as opposed to trying to create 100 emails all throughout a process. So like how do we just create 5 emails today from like strategy all the way down to like implementing and putting them in Klaviyo?
And it kind of goes back to what you're talking about right at the start when we started talking, right? Just having like pods, I think you described them as. Is that like, that would be the next step after you create those pods to like put this workflow into place?
Oh, there's a lot of steps, but this is definitely one of them.
Look at me trying to short circuit it.
For
Kyle,
sure.
tell us how to do it on an easy way.
So there is no easy way. Let me take that back. Everything that I'm talking about is very simple. Like conceptually, it's very simple. Doing it is not easy.
Mm-hmm.
It is hard to do, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That, like you're talking, no, like you're talking about SOPs. Like, you know, you might get these owners that lock themselves in the room and they've come up with this like beautiful Notion document, but then they take it to their team and the team's like, this isn't it. So I guess you could apply that same kind of analogy to everything we're talking about. Mm-hmm. I'm curious. You explained it really well, your issue with utilization and why you like to frame it as capacity instead. What else do you think is like a commonly used metric that maybe agency people shouldn't rely on so much, you know? Because you ask anyone and everyone's got
the assumption there is that agency owners are tracking metrics.
What was that?
I said the assumption there is that agency owners are even really tracking metrics.
Okay, let's go there.
So most
they're not?
Aren't. No. So like we have 34 agencies and agency operators right now. There's like 43 people in the community because I have some co-founders in there. And I think there's only maybe 2 agencies that have come through that I've audited and have looked at their metrics where they actually had good metrics or any really metrics at all. And the metrics most agency owners are tracking are things like revenue. Hopefully they track profit. They might track some version of gross margin, which is like our cost to deliver goods. Fewer are even tracking churn on a monthly basis or a cohort basis, depending upon how you want to look at it. And then they try to, like larger agencies will be like, NPS is the one metric we should track for fulfillment. Like those are usually the metrics that they track. And the issue with every single one of those metrics is that they are lagging metrics, meaning they have already happened. Like once you see your profit on your P&L, it's already happened. You can't change it. And what we want to track is leading metrics that lead us to the result that we want so we can be proactive as opposed to reactive, like tracking revenue and churn. And if you want to dive into those metrics, we can do now. I know you have some questions about metrics later, but like
let's do the metrics.
Yeah. Okay.
This is where the beef is, because you're talking about all these things as being lagging metrics, and it's honestly the amount of people that you've come to you that aren't tracking it is kind of like shocking, especially the churn. I'm quite surprised at that because I don't understand how you'd be able to plan properly without tracking these things. But I guess that's probably the issue, right? The inability to plan.
Yeah.
Is anyone that you're coming to able to, apart from the two golden agency owners that you mentioned, is anyone doing any kind of meaningful forecasting or any of that or not? Nothing set up?
So I think the agencies that are over like $2 to $3 million a year have to have some sort
Mm-hmm.
of forecasting, because if not, they're just going to die. Like you can't run an agency that size without good forecasting or some level of it. But it tends to be like we have 50 employees, we have 40 employees. Like we have to have some level of this in the business in order for it not to fall apart. And that's usually the impetus to create forecasting. It's really rare in smaller agencies. And it takes a lot of time to properly do, which I think is probably one of the barriers for them to do it.
How hard is it to like retroactively add it though? Just say you've got a 20-person agency, but you're planning to grow, and then you get to 40, and then you're like, oh, we really need to start forecasting and like plotting out, projects and like expected revenue. How much harder is it to retroactively add it rather than start making it a good practice when you're growing?
Exponentially harder.
Mm-hmm.
Like factors of 10 harder. And it's definitely one of those processes that agency owners should be doing regularly, is taking a look at forecasting and capacity. So like I have this whole sheet built out, and it's my most popular lead magnet that I give away on LinkedIn, which is this core metrics dashboard. And we don't do the forecasting on that. There's one that we do inside agency operators where I give the forecasting to it. But that has, I think, all the correct metrics that you should be using, to correct leading metrics that you should be using to look at tracking your agency.
Which are? Can you give them away? Can we talk through them?
Yeah, 100%.
Cool.
Absolutely. So the way that you want to think about metric and KPI creation in your agency specific, and I'm gonna talk about delivery here for a second, because this is the one that's usually left out. Like everything that I talked about before was financial and sales or lead gen related. Let's talk about like delivery and ops here. NPS is usually what people use, which again, lagging indicator, doesn't help you. Retroactive, it's not proactive. So the way you want to think about KPI creation is, how do we do the things that our clients value so that we can get to the result that we want, that will lead to the result that we want. And generally the way that I advise agency owners to do this is like actually go talk to your clients, like talk to your 5 best clients and ask them, what do you value from us from a service perspective, from an experience perspective, from a delivery perspective? And then we turn those things into KPIs. But if you do like hundreds of those calls like I have, you boil them down into like 5 main KPIs. The first KPI is a performance KPI. So some sort of performance metric. And this is usually what you sold the agency, what we sold your client on. And if you're a paid media agency, that is like revenue, is your revenue. If you're email, it might be the same thing. If you're creative, it might be that as well. So like if you're B2B lead gen, maybe it's number of leads, like whatever the thing you're selling your client on, that is the number one thing you track, because it doesn't matter what else you do. If you don't actually deliver on that promise, they're gonna quit. Like they're gonna resign. They're out. They're terminating your contract. So that's the number one thing, is performance. But then and that's on a per client basis. And we look at that every single week as a leadership team. So every single client, are they 100% of where we told them that they'd be at, or are we 30% of where we'd be at? The second metric is revision percentage. Clients want you to create things that are perfect every single time. And they don't want to have to tell you, I don't like this, or they don't have to tell you, you should have a different font here. And every time that they tell you that, they're thinking, why am I paying this person all this money if I have to tell them what to do? That's literally the thought that's going in their head. So they value the smoothness of not having revisions. So if we have a process where we're performing and there's no revisions, like clients super value that. The third metric is errors. So you've delivered an ad to a client, and then you find out you put the wrong logo in there. The link goes to the wrong landing page. All those things that the clients find out about afterwards, where the same thing is going through their mind. They're like, oh, they keep messing up. Why am I paying them all this money? I should just do this myself, or like pay somebody else to do it who doesn't screw up all the time, right? So we look at metrics like that, where we know if we do these things that clients value, that will lead us to the result that we want, which is clients to stay for a long time and pay us a lot of money. That is how you become proactive with KPIs versus reactive. Because if they're not hitting performance, or they have a lot of revisions, there's a high risk of churn. As opposed to, okay, we track churn, what happened? That's the difference.
Is this something that like is specific to each agency though, right? Or are you telling every agency to track these things in a broad sense, and then they can hone in on what's really important to them, depending on what they're selling or what they're offering and what their productized service is?
Yeah. Every agency needs a performance metric on a per client basis that they're tracking weekly, if not daily, if you have much larger clients where there could be a very large amount of ad spend or a very large amount of deliverables. Revision percentage, if you have any process where a client is approving something or disproving something, you need to track that. Error rate, another thing you need to track if generally, even if you don't have a client approval process. Another metric is either lead time or time to value. And time to value, there's a lot of different ways to measure it, but like how I measure it is from the date that they became a client until the date that we reach the goal that we promised them. Like how long did that take? Because we want to shrink that. And the best business would be like, hey, I'm going to sell you this thing and we're going to get these results. And then tomorrow or the same day you deliver those results. Like that's the best business. But most agencies have this 90-day onboarding program where you're like, it takes us 90 days. And my clients don't like that. They don't value that. And they would pay a lot more money for it if you could get the results sooner. So we focus on that, as well as lead time, which is back to email. Like how long did it take for us to deliver these emails on average? Because the longer that process takes, the more issues pop up, the more revisions happen, the more errors happen. And we want to shrink that time to as little as possible as well. So I think those metrics specifically, every single agency should be tracking at a service perspective or on a pod perspective. And there's other ones as well that you could get into if you really wanted, but like just start there. Like that's where you start.
And practically, how are you advising people to track this? Because again, this sounds great, but if I'm an agency owner listening to this, it's like, what tools do they need? Or are they collecting this stuff manually, inputting it into a sheet? Like, how do they actually go about doing what you've just suggested?
Good question. So performance is going to be different depending upon the service that you sell. So if it's email, like you might just pull data from Klaviyo, and Klaviyo has horrible APIs, so you might have to pay someone to do this. Yeah.
Yikes.
God,
sorry, Klaviyo.
Yeah. If it's Facebook, like there's softwares out there that you can API data into the sheets, and they're not cheap, but like they work. If it's like lead gen leads, it's really easy to pull those numbers off of a calendar. You're probably already tracking those things. So whatever type of service you sell, there's some automated way to track performance. Revisions, you need some sort of project management system. And I really like ClickUp for agencies for a few different reasons, which I don't have time to get into today. But I really like how you can just create custom fields for revisions. Then you can count those revisions. So you can automate revision tracking and ClickUp. Error rate is the one that's difficult, if not impossible, to track automated. And that's because it's kind of like a Scouts honor thing where like something happened after the thing was delivered and the client or somebody on your team is the best case scenario brings this up and is like, hey, we messed up here after it was delivered. So there's a Scouts honor to it, which leads me to an important point that the culture in your agency needs to be okay with failure. People are human. We are going to mess up. It's going to happen. Like if you track error rates over time, it will very rarely be zero consistently. We're human, right? The error is human. What is not okay is having an error, not trying to find the root cause of that error and letting it happen again. That's not okay. So it's okay for things to be red if you're tracking these things and for errors that happen. Every error or everything that happens is an opportunity for us to learn and to create and add to this playbook. Oh, next time we should be doing this, especially for this specific client because they like their T's crossed and their I's dotted. So there needs to be a cultural change as well. We're like, hey, it's okay if this happens, but we got to figure out why it happened so it never happens again.
I guess that goes back to what we were talking about about SOPs though, right? Like in a broader sense, if you involve people in creating these processes and get them to have some skin in the game, I'm assuming that's where you kind of encourage that, because the more people get involved and comfortable in the processes, the more comfortable they're going to be with being, maybe admitting that, a mistake happened or there was a wrong link or a client complained, because you're right, it's going to happen. Like no agency is perfect, especially when you're scaling.
And I think that the phrase you just mentioned, skin in the game, is important too, because that actually means you need to compensate people based on this as well. And like the way that I typically do this, because I think this is the way that best aligns everybody's interests, is some sort of profit share. So I'll give the team a percentage of pod profit for that pod. So they're incentivized to create new processes. Because if you're like, hey, we're going to create all these processes, they're going to be like, that's not what I signed up for. Like, that's not my job. So you're like, you're right. So I'm going to pay you for it in the form of a profit share. So every new client that we bring on is additional revenue, is additional profit. Like, how do we bring on more clients? How do we increase the capacity of our team members, of yourself, so you can bring on more clients or bring on larger clients that pay us more money so we can all make more money together? So there has to be like a level of buy-in from a compensation perspective as well. I think this is something that most agency owners who are new to process creation, like you might have a fire and people might be okay solving it. But if you continue to do it after the fire is solved, they're going to be like, why am I still doing this? The answer needs to be because I have a impact from it. Like I get personally impacted positively, hopefully, because we're creating new processes, but allowing us to do better things, and I get paid more money.
How does that go down when you suggest that?
Honestly, not that bad. Like most agency owners are open to some form of additional compensation for the team if it gets them to the result that they want.
Right. Makes sense on paper. It's just interesting. When you were telling me that, I was like, sounds great. What does it look like when you actually suggest that to agency owners? Are they open to it? Is a profit share model something that has been around for a long time, or is this kind of like a newer thing for agencies? Or like, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it's been around for a long time. I don't think it's been used very often.
Right. That's a
And I
shame.
think it's like if you think that you as the agency owner do all the work and you tell people what to do, if you're using that same thinking, they don't deserve a profit share. But if you flip that upside down and you're like, the team does all the work, the team knows the best way to do this, they're the best people who can help create process improvements, thus make more money for the people, then you want to compensate them via a profit share. So it's a mentality, I think. It's like a thought process.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. And obviously it all feeds back into, the people that are working for you, as I said, getting skin in the game. If they're invested financially as well, they're obviously
Exactly.
going to have, people want money. Like, yeah, they want a good workspace and good work-life balance. But agencies, it's not easy to work in an agency. That's the theme that's come up in this series as well. Yeah, it's like good work and it's challenging, but it's also like difficult, right? Which is why we talk about, utilization metrics. I hate to trigger you about talking about
It's all good. It's all
utilization,
good.
but like this is why you can't have people running at 100% all the time because it's not sustainable. You mentioned 6 hours before creativity gets burnt out. Yeah, of course. Like you can't have someone working 40 plus hours a week and expecting them not to mess up. So when you're talking, it all kind of like links back together. If you take care of people, don't expect them to work nuts, they won't mess up. But if you give them a space where they are comfortable in admitting their error, then it will like work out, right? But we're talking about
100%.
profits and, I obviously have been sifting through your emails, but you mentioned that you were working with a client who had stagnant growth. I think that's how you framed it. And they were stuck at like 1 million ARR and they couldn't shift. And you were talking about how if they just increase their margins, I think it was by like 10%, they would have increased their profits by 60 or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, how do you go to an agency owner? Do you open their books up and say, if we just tweak this and make this work, we could get, a 60% increase in profits? What are you looking for when you're advising people to make margin changes in their pricing and things like that?
Okay. Good question.
Bit of a
How do you
loaded
think
one,
about,
sorry.
yeah, I know it's good. So how do you think about price changes? The reality is most agency owners are too cheap. Like most of you are just too cheap. And it's because you don't really understand the value you provide to your clients and what they receive. And you have a self-inflicted view of your own value. So like there's agency owners that I'm working with. They're like, oh yeah, we made our client $1 million last month and they have $3,000 contracts. And I'm like, the value discrepancy there is incredible. And I also know market rates for just being in the agency space for so long. So like if you're selling creative and you're $3,000 a month, like that's very difficult to do, especially if you're sourcing or have professional film. So I'm like, if we double this, and you don't even need to double it, right? This is how the math works out. So if you're a 20% net agency and you increase your prices by 20%, 100% of that price increase, if you sell more clients, will go to your bottom line. So if you're 20% net and you raise your prices 20% and you sell more clients at that new price point, you're now 40% net. Like that's how simple it is. Like every percentage point of price increase, assuming conversion costs stay the same, goes straight to the bottom line. And that's a really easy conversation to have. Actually, we're like, oh wow, we don't even need to they have this perception where like we need to triple prices, which oftentimes I do recommend that. But it's like, even if you just did a 20% price increase, like I promise you, sales will not be impacted and you can double your margins in the next year by just doing that. And then I also like to look at that on the inverse perspective as well, because every percentage point of increase in capacity of our team also goes straight to the bottom line too. So if you're an agency and you increase your prices 20%, you just double your profit. And if you also increase the capacity of your team to take on more clients, previously they could take on 4, now they can take on 5, you doubled your profit again just by those two simple changes. 20% price increase, 20% increase in capacity. So that's what we're trying to focus on. Like, how do we just do these things, these simple things that can make really big impacts to our agency because it's simple. It's not easy.
Is there a margin percentage that you like to see when agency owners come to you?
Yeah.
I guess it depends on the size and ARR and things like that. But
Mhm.
what kind of benchmark do you normally like people to have?
Okay, I'll give a few benchmarks here because I think benchmarks are important. So I like to see the cost of delivery, which is essentially gross margin, of anywhere from 20 to 40%. If we include leaders in the leaders that do the delivery. So in my system, we use pod leaders who are leaders of these pods or service line leaders who leads the service line. I want to see 30 to 50% of total revenue going to that talent. And if it's less than that, then it seems good, but I'm like, do you have the talent commensurate with the level of pricing? Like, do we have talent gaps here? Because maybe we're paying people too little that are international and we're having these big contracts. Like maybe we need a better level of talent. And if it's too high, it's the opposite. It's how do we raise pricing? Because your margins for what the current business is don't make sense. So gross margins, and that includes everything for the cost of delivery. So if you're a creative team, that includes the cost of models, that includes the cost of software for the people that are doing the thing, like all of that, 30 to 50% max. And then I like to see 10 to 20% go to operations and to management. So that's 30% left, unless you do ads. And then there's maybe another 10% in there for ads and sales. The average agency that I see is already like, if they're smaller, like 40% net. They're sub $500,000 because the owner is doing most of the work, which is not sustainable long term. So their margins are going to drop. But the best part about agencies is they're cash generating machines, more than any other asset that you can own, more than e-commerce, more than a SaaS. Like agencies put off cash. So 20 to 30% is pretty good. We work with some agencies that are 40 to 50% net. But like that is the main reason to start an agency, outside the fact that you probably love the service, is like they just give off cash. They're really great assets. So I hope I gave you some good benchmarks there.
Yeah, it's interesting. And obviously, like the more people I've been interviewing for this as well, everyone has their own benchmarks and their own what they're aiming for. But when I spoke to Eli, he made a joke that he thinks that people look at him on LinkedIn, the posts that he makes, and think, oh, this guy, 40%, what's he bragging about? I've got a 90%, margin. And he's like, yeah, but wait until you add in-house ops and in-house, once you start building your team out, that's not like an IC, right? And once you kind of start to scale up, you won't be 90%. It's easy to get to 90% when you're by yourself. But when
like,
you actually,
what do you have? Like your QuickBooks subscription, like the costs are really cheap.
Sales Navigator.
But
So
the
it's
idea
just
is
interesting.
that while your margin percentage might decrease, the total net profit of the business and the profit the business generates increases as well.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because your numbers are pretty much in line with what I've been hearing from people that have kind of multi-million-dollar agencies, right, that have been around for a long time. So yeah, interesting. I just wanted to ask you about, because we're talking about churn, and I know obviously people aren't tracking that, which is kind of problematic, but we're talking about clients and retention. And I think another constant theme I've been hearing is almost like a expectation setting when someone's joining the agency, and just like really getting that right, so people aren't expecting things to go live in 2 days, or them to get immediate results if they're in like certain industry like SEO or whatever. Maybe a bit of a spicy question, but do you think agencies have a bit of a reputation for under delivering? And on the flip side of that, how can agencies put up some guardrails when they're onboarding clients to make sure that they're setting expectations correctly in terms of like deliverables and results?
Yeah. So how do we make sure expectations are set appropriately for clients? And then our agency is notorious for onboarding clients and giving them false perceptions.
If you want to
Yes.
answer that.
Yeah, I think so for sure. And the reason, well, there's a lot of reasons, but I think the main root cause of this is there's zero barrier to entry to become an agency. Like you put your name up on Upwork or on a website, and then you put a Twitter post and a LinkedIn, voila, you have an agency. So there's no like formal process you go through to become an agency owner. So yes, there's a lot of people that are over promising and under delivering, even in larger agencies. And like the way that you combat that is you actually take a look at process. You understand the time to value that it takes to actually give clients the value. So when you're selling them on the thing, it's based on data. It's not based on your sales pitch. And then what was your other question? Let me get in that one too.
Just about how agencies can kind of just avoid false hope, and when people actually get in and start working with them, that they're not annoyed and feel like they've been let down.
Okay.
Yeah. If there's anything that you can offer in terms of like onboarding or during the sales process, not like over delivering, not over promising, that kind of thing.
I mean, obviously during the sales process, don't over deliver on the sales process. But like, if you think about it from a first principle perspective, if we just like boil it down to the most basic units of the thing, it's like, if you actually do what you tell clients to do, then clients will be happy. And if you're over promising on those things, then it doesn't matter. Nothing else matters. Like clients are going to be unhappy and they're going to leave. So now like, you can create nice onboarding processes and you can create nice sales handover processes so the teams are informed and they have a better understanding of things. But ultimately, if the client doesn't get what you sold them, the client will leave. And the way we used to combat this at Weekend is we would do audits. And because at Weekend we're acquiring assets versus just trying to sell people on like services, we would do full P&L audits and balance sheet audits. So we would know exactly what their costs were, exactly what they're paying themselves, exactly all the things. And then we would build out projections based on what we think that we could do with their brand. So like we knew coming into the first month, like this brand is a shit show. I don't know if I can curse on here. Whatever.
You can definitely curse.
Okay, cool. Yeah, this brand is a dumpster fire. So we're going to need to do really these things. We're going to need to cut costs here. We're going to need to move ad spend here, do these things from a content perspective to get this thing to where it should be at. So for us, that was really helpful because like we already knew everything going in. If you don't have an audit process in your agency and you're just bringing on clients like that, that is a difficult situation. So I would advise some sort of audit process, whether it's paid or unpaid is up for debate, but there should be some sort of process where like, you know exactly the situation that you're walking into prior to signing the client. And then you're building the roadmap based on that, based on like the team's actual ability to deliver.
Definitely a theme again that I've heard, but again, a theme from like the larger agency owners with the multi-million dollar like revenue, because they've got processes and that they won't offer just like a cookie cutter proposal and stuff. They want to actually get in and have a look around and see what they can do first and figure out if they're actually a client that they want to work with as well.
100%. Like the audit was more for us. We're like, do we want to acquire this thing and work with them? Than it was for the client who got a lot of value from the audit. But it's a sales filtering process as well.
Yeah. All right. We're nearly out of time. So I just wanted to ask you, because it wouldn't be, a podcast if I didn't ask you. What do you think about AI in agencies at the moment? Are people using it? Are people hesitant? Are people, overestimating its importance in terms of like client deliverables and how they set things up? What's your take?
Okay. When is this podcast being posted?
A couple of months, a couple of weeks.
Okay. So I'm doing an email forum on AI and ops in 2 weeks. So it'll probably be past then. You guys can go on LinkedIn and watch it. I have a few thoughts about AI and the agency space. And my first thought is that clients always pay for value. They don't pay for cost. So we might see this huge decrease in the cost to deliver a service. And people are like, oh my gosh, prices are going to come down. Like so I have my own audit process for agencies that I consult for and that I charge $5,000 for. And I created an AI and I fed it all the transcripts of all my audits. And I gave it frameworks to think how I think. And now it used to take me 2 hours to do the audit manually. Now it takes the AI 15 minutes and it takes me 15 minutes to confirm everything is correct. So I cut my time by 75% to do an audit. And my initial thought was like, man, I can charge less for this now. But then I was like, wait, but people are still paying $5,000 and I'm making way more money. Why would I charge less for it? So people are always going to be paying for value delivered, not for the cost that's there. I think that's really important to understand. Another point is that if it doesn't matter how good your operations are, sales and lead gen will probably be the bottleneck for most agencies, because sales and lead gen consistently at a good CAC or cost per acquisition is incredibly difficult and notoriously a bottleneck for most agency owners. So you can have the best AI service in the world. It doesn't matter if you can't sell it. So sales ops and lead gen ops and making sure these things are all great processes and not going to be the bottleneck of the agency is also going to be super important. I think most agency owners now are criminally underutilizing AI. And I think over the next year, you're going to see a lot of agency owners who don't use it go out of business. Mm-hmm. Like that are just using it here or there for projects. And then I think to the other end, you'll also have a lot of agencies that try to use AI too much because it's not perfect yet. Like there's still a 1 to 5% error rate with AI, which is not acceptable from a client's perspective. Like if you're relying on ChatGPT right now, 100% for copy without any human intervention, you are not going to be in business for very long. Or Claude, which is much better at content creation, in my opinion. So we're not there yet, but We will be there very soon.
It's crazy how good it's getting. Like, I totally agree with you. I think not just agencies, but any business, right, that doesn't figure out how to use it quick is going to be in trouble in the next. I think if we're having this conversation in 12 months, we would be having a different conversation. But it's interesting to hear your use case, because that kind of stuff makes perfect sense. And like you say, people don't care how you're doing it if they're getting the result. People don't care if you're doing your audit or your customer research or, setting up things. Where I've heard that people aren't using it is more what you've just said, the generative AI, actual copy or stuff like that. I think it will get there. It's not there yet, but I think it will get there. And then there's going to be a whole nother discussion about how to differentiate when it does. So
yeah. It will get there. The differentiator that's going to make it get there faster for your agency or not is how much IP do you currently have in your agency? And by IP, I mean written down process, written down transcripts, written down information you can feed into the AI. Revisions
prompting is a
from
skill,
humans.
Don't you think?
So,
prompting is a skill.
So it is. I think the prompting will become less important as the AI gets smarter. The data that you feed into it is going to determine the difference between success or not. And like here's the example that I'll get to too is, and somebody posed this question to me on LinkedIn. They're like, how can we use AI for process improvement? And I'm like, there are so many competing frameworks for process improvement. And right now, AI takes the most generalized one because that's what it does. It just tries to predict the next word, which is the most general word. It doesn't care about frameworks, and it will give you competing ways to make a process better that are opposite of each other. So you need to be very specific with the data that you're giving it, and you need to be very specific in how the AI should use it and think in order to get the result that you want, because it's just using generalized data. So like very specific IP, very specific things you're feeding it, and very specific ways to solve those problems to get the most out of it.
I just want to ask you one more thing. Do you set up like specific when you're talking about that? Like I've seen people set up gems, for example, with what you're talking about, IP all loaded in, and then that creates its own little like mini agent where you can ask and feed questions just from say 10 elements that you plug in there. Is that kind of what you're using it for, or you're encouraging people to build out specific things for specific processes?
So you can have databases of information, and these are usually like vectorized storage bases, and like ChatGPT is really good. A lot of people use these third-party things like Pinecone or other types of databases. So like you can have all this data in one place. You'll probably need individual agents that do one or two things to pull the data to do that thing in the best way. So for example, like one of the ways I'm using AI right now is it records every single call transcript that I'm on, and it puts it into a database. And then from those calls, I tell the AI, this is all automated, like, hey, tell me 5 things from this call transcript that I could use to write content. So that's one agent, but it's the database. And then I have another agent that's like, hey, from these sales calls or from these calls with other people, tell me 3 things that I can improve. So I have a database that's aggregating all this data together from transcripts or from whatever. And then I have individual agents that have tasks to pull out from all that data, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's just constantly learning, constantly getting fed about stuff that is important to your business.
Yes. That's like my thoughts and my words, as opposed to general data that ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini is going to want to, give you.
And are you using ChatGPT? Is that what you use, or do you use something else?
I prefer Claude. I like Claude. 3.5 Sonnet actually over their new model, 3.7.
Niche.
I think it's better for content and for copy, so I tend to use it more. It's also better, I think, from an analytics perspective than ChatGPT. So they just came out with a new plan. Anthropic did yesterday of like $100. So now I'm on that plan.
Drop your affiliate link.
But it goes, Gemini just created Gemini 2.5, and it's an amazing model as well that can do a lot of things that ChatGPT can't. So, there's an arms race right now with AI, and I tend to use them for different things, but Claude is definitely getting most of my attention right now.
It's good for us. It's amazing. And like I said, if we had this conversation in 12 months, I'd love to hear how you're using it, how your clients are using it. I bet you would have a completely different conversation.
Yeah, they're AI cyborgs running their agencies now.
I know. AI doing the interview. Oh, don't. Right. Kyle, thank you so much. It's been really fun. I just want to wrap up. Why don't you tell people where they can find agency operators, find yourself on LinkedIn, drop all your info.
Yeah, sure. So you can find me at agencyoperators with an s.io. So agencyoperators.io. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Just search Kyle Hunt or search like ops. I tend to pop up there on the top. And so appreciative, Kimberly, that you had me on this podcast. So this was really exciting.
Yeah, it's been so fun. Thanks so much, Kyle.